Okay, so Aria Avalon, what other option do white women have? Everyone else hates us. Everyone has been very vocal about women being on their own after the election. Now our abuser is turning up the abuse to control us. Okay, so I wanted to be able to discuss this comment, but we have to make some agreements before we go into this, okay? Thing number one, there is no dogpiling. This is a educational space. We're exchanging information. Thing number two is that for any white woman that listens to this video, please resist the urge to feel guilty or to hate yourself. That's not what this is. We are exchanging facts. And in order for us to exchange facts and deconstruct ideologies that are not helpful to the forward progression of society, we must deal with the facts. And sometimes the truth is scary, okay? Thing number three, and the most important thing, please leave not everybody outside of these comments. This is not, this is talking about the general society, okay? So please know I'm not like this, not every white woman, okay? So these are all the agreements that all of us have agreed to make. Great, so let's move forward, okay? Now, I wanna be able to tell you about the thing about white women, because I also saw your other comment where you said that white women have been fighting as well. But I want to let you know that that hasn't been long. White women have not been fighting for long. So just let me tell you a little bit about the backside of white women when it comes down to the oppression in the United States of America. Because the myth that has been circulated is that all the way back to even slavery, slavery was kind of like a white man's thing. But let me tell you how white women were a part of slavery. So what we're going to do is we're going to start in 1669, right, with the Casual Killing Act. The Casual Killing Act was explicitly passed, hear me, was explicitly passed because white women were unaliving mixed children in very cruel and alarming ways. To be specific, they were using methods such as boiling them, skinning them, torturing them, and beating them to death. Like those were the methods that were utilized. Also, did you know that slave skin was used for shoes? Okay, so this is what women were doing to slaves. And it got so bad that there had to be a law that was passed in order to protect them because white men did not want to hold them accountable. You can double check all of my reference. This one is coming from The Ohio State University, as well as other places. Okay, this is documented stuff, alrighty?
Hello, what's up everybody? How are you doing? I hope you're doing super great from whatever you're watching us from now. These are presented Gentic Stories and I'm hoping that you are great from wherever you're watching us from. Now in today's video is a little more of an educative video that I want us to look into. For the longest time we've been seeing a lot of historical documents trying to show how women have done so much evil, same as their male counterparts, right? And when you try to look at the history, like for example the 1955, what happened to Emmett Till was so devastating. And in this video, we are going to see this black woman, beautiful black woman, trying to describe how the environment that sometimes we come from teaches us to be oppression. And this really shows you that we are a product of the environment that we come from, right? We don't so much deviate from what we relate with. We don't so much deviate from the things that we do. A standard example is when you try to look at the matriarchal society and patriarchal societies, there is a way that they affect both men and women. And let's take it back to those Jim Crow times when the society was so patriarchal in the essence that, for example, when you try to look at places like the South, right? The South was so much, patriarchy in the extent that it made women, white women, reflect the oppressions that they were having in their household, and they reflected it back to black people because at the back of their mind, they thought that they were better Because all along, what they are always been taught in the house was there's somebody is always better than you, and that's a white man, and you're a white woman, and then black people, right down the strata. So I want us to watch this video because it is more revealing, and it's gonna be showing a perspective that I take as forbidden. Why? Because they don't always want you to know this part of history. I don't know whether it's white history, I don't know whether it's black history, but it's an history that it is forbidden, that they don't always want you to know. So I want us to watch this video. I hope you all get to learn, we all get to see the perspective that she shares. It's really, really important that we all get to learn and really know all these things, how this thing happen. For the longest time, you see white women playing victim, or white women making a lot of black men go to jail. It is a reflection of how they were also being treated, right? And this is that part of history that sometimes people don't share with you. And I'm here for an open discussion. Let me know, what you think about this in the comment section, right? For those who are watching us for the first time, I'll ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you like what I put out there. For those who are always supporting me through my Cash App account, through my super thanks, man, I really, really appreciate you. For those who still wish to buy me a coffee, my Cash App is on my bio. I'll most definitely appreciate. Now let's watch the video. I'll be back and we'll have a discussion in regards to this. As you know, these are presented gender stories, and let's have a discussion about this.
So we know that this is how women were engaging with slaves. Fast forward, right? And now you have the Mississippi Married Women's Property Law of 1839. Okay. And this is very important because a lot of people didn't believe that white women owned slaves, but they did. And this particular law, as well as others like it, allowed for them to be able to take over the wealth of the property should their husbands pass away, and for other reasons that they ended up receiving this type of wealth. Now, this is very different than what was happening in the North. And the reason why it's different than what was happening in the North is because in the North, they were underneath coverture, which for coverture meant that whatever the woman owned belonged to her husband when she got married. So Southern women were richer than Northern white women. And this is very important when you talk about white women supporting some of the things that were going on in the oppression of others in the South, especially when it comes down to the Civil War, because the Civil War had the same outcome for white women in the South that it did for white men in the South, which was everybody was finna be stripped from their wealth. Do you see why white women would support the oppression of others? Even though they themselves are also being oppressed. And this is what is confounding, is that white women, though they also were oppressed, didn't mind participating in the oppression of others due to their direct benefit of patriarchy and the direct benefit of their oppressor's oppression. Okay, now we gonna keep on going. Because studies also show that because white women in the South were able to own such property, that they accounted for 1/3 of slave transactions that happened in the South. 1/3. That is 33.333333 all the way off into eternity percent of the transactions. But transactions that involved slave women, white women were participating in the marketplace for those transactions at a 40% clip. Now, that's what was happening during slavery. Let's go ahead and fast forward. And this history we all know a little bit more about, right? The weaponizing of white women's tears is what ended up occurring by the time we get to Jim Crow, by the time we get to lynching, right? And there are a lot of different examples that we have of white women lying on people, getting them unalived, and white women coming out to say, oh, by the way, lied about that right before they pass away. That is no different than what actually happens here in modern society, like now that we are fast forwarding, because remember, Emmett Till was in the 70s, 60s, 70s, as in 1960s, 70s. Okay, and remember, that white woman lied on him, and remember, she came out and said that she lied right before she passed away. Okay, so now we fast forward it, all right, to what happens in modern day. Some of the ways that this shows up in modern day is at work, when white women go to superiors and bosses and they say that a person of color is not trying to be their friend, or a person of color is not talking to them, or they tried to be nice to them and they're not being nice back. This is another way that shows up. Because you have to know that you're going to go and tell them that would mean that somebody's going to come and do something about it, because that's the way that white women have been able to navigate this space and this earth. Everybody in America, and I would dare say everybody in the world, knows that a white man caves at the tears of a white woman. And how do I know this? My sociology class. At the end, the last week of that class, we were able to ask other minority or other ethnic groups questions that we wanted to know about them. And as you can see, I'm a bit of a chatty person. And so I myself was called upon to ask the first question. And the very first question that I asked was to my white colleagues. And I asked them, why do you guys cry when you don't get your way? Because my black women's tears don't move anything. Okay? But why do you guys cry? And they honestly answered and was like, we were taught to do that so that we can get what we wanted. Now, mind you, this sociology class was run by a white woman, and she was mixed with white and Native American. And she was also somebody that participated in civil rights. Love this woman down. Okay. Now, the reason why people are saying that white women are on their own is because white women, just like every other group except for black women, benefit due to the proximity or in some form fashion from the oppression that white men put on everybody else. And in this moment, white women have to fend for themselves because the rest of us are fending for ourselves. And that's why. And it hasn't been long that you guys have had to fend for yourself because of your stance in being able to help support minority groups. And is it easy? No, because there's a price to be paid to stand up for what's right. But to give in because it's hard, and to give in because other minority groups aren't fighting for you, with you, isn't fair, because you haven't fought for them with them for that long. All right, not too much. I do agree with your sentiment, but I would say that it more so shows them who their family was. And it also adds context for them about why the older generation of their families are very reluctant, hesitant, or it is difficult for them to understand what they're saying about how others are being mistreated and how they would need to stand up for the mistreatment of minority people groups, because there's a generational difference. The thing about traumas and familial stories and habits is that they're intergenerational, right? So if one generation experiences a negative situation, they teach their kids, and then their kids teach their kids, and then their kids teach their kids, and then their kids teach their kids. The only way to find out if the story is true or not, it goes back to proximity. Proximity to people of color have taught a lot of the millennials, Gen Zers, Gen Alphas, and even some of the Gen Xers, that the story that has been passed down from generation to generation isn't true. And because the information has been attached to that specific, these younger generations. That's why they are so staunchly different in their stance than older generations. That's why you kind of have this us and them thing that's kind of happening with a lot of white people in their families. It is very important to understand the beginning, the origin of a story. Because, yeah, people that were raised in that generation, people that were raised in that era, it is very, very difficult to unlearn habits and beliefs that are foundational to who you say you are and how you navigate this world. It is literally a shifting of an entire mental paradigm. And that's not an easy thing to just change, right? Like when you take a look at this current administration, President Trump was alive before desegregation. His parents was alive during sharecropping. You see what I'm saying? Like, so these type of beliefs that he has are very, very deeply rooted because of the generation that his family comes from, if that makes sense. So VP Kamala Harris graduated with her doctorate degree, in Juris Doctorate degree is what it's called, in 1989. Beginning in 1990, she became a prosecuting attorney. Then she was also the district attorney. She then became the attorney general, and from being the attorney general, she also became the a U.S. senator. And then from being a U.S. senator, she went to being the VP of the United States of America. This is 30 years worth of preparation, 30 years worth of studying, 30 years worth of understanding her sector, understanding what's necessary when it comes down to governance, and honing her craft. What we currently see is that there is an assault on qualified people, on qualifying, disqualified people. And so this administration right now is seeking to be able to have a narrative that they want qualified people to be in roles, to be able to lead the government. But at the same time, they are seeking to make it very hard for you to be a qualified person. And so I want to be able to encourage you all today in that whatever sector you wish to go into, prioritize qualifying yourself, learning things, having those certifications, even if you choose not to do a traditional route where you go to a university, that is perfectly fine. But you must find a way to qualify yourself, not for right now, but for the future. And when it comes down to those that have been fantastic leaders, they know the importance of being qualified. They know the importance of education. And Barack Obama said that there's no need for us to wait for other people. We are the person that we're waiting for. We are the change that we seek. And so for those that are millennials, for those that are Gen Xers, now is your time. But in order for you to be able to do what it is that you want to do as far as assisting others and going into these places and spaces where you can impact and affect change, you must be qualified. And the time for you to be qualified is not when you're needed. You are supposed to qualify yourself in preparation for when you're needed. Had Vice President Kamala Harris not taken the time to qualify herself, there is an argument that when she was needed, she would have not been selected and thusly would not have been chosen. One of my previous videos talks about this narrative of what's for me is for me. I don't like that narrative. And the reason why I don't like that narrative is because it leads to complacency. It leads one to believe that by osmosis, everything that you desire is just going to show up for you. And that's not how life works at all. You must be prepared to receive what it is that you are trying to obtain. And this current administration is seeking to dismantle the Department of Education. Have you not thought about why we are seeking to dismantle the Department of Education?
You literally have men that are in power right now that are unqualified and unfit to even run their own businesses. Not an educational requirement has been met. Not a service requirement has been done. One of them even sought to dodge the service requirement that was mandated by claiming that he had some type of disability. So in this time, where there is a targeted and concerted effort to qualify the disqualified, I urge you to find yourself qualified. Not for today, but for tomorrow. Because now is quickly approaching our time to be able to impact change. And I am underneath the belief that those that are necessary for change are you and I. But the only difference between you and I being the change that's needed and not being the change that's needed is whether or not we are.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you've heard her perspective and how she said a couple of things, maybe a few corrections here and there. She really did a great work, and I commend her so much because she opened my eye and gave me a perspective about something that I didn't see it that way. But at least for right now, I'm able to, look at it. Now, I'm having a presentation on the role of oppressed white women and the reflection of oppression onto black people. This is how they reflected towards you. Now, throughout the history, white women in Western societies, particularly in the US, have experienced systemic oppression under patriarchal rule. While they were denied political rights, economic independence, and full autonomy, their subjugation never equated to the racial oppression suffered by black people. However, instead of forming coalitions with black people to challenge white male dominance, many white women reinforced racial hierarchies, often reflecting their own oppression onto black individuals. This phenomenon has played a crucial role in shaping the racial and gender dynamics of Western history. Now, as we get to continue, one of the most glaring examples of this dynamic was during slavery in the United States. While white women were legally and socially subjugated to their husbands and fathers, they wielded considerable power over enslaved black people, especially black women. The domestic sphere, where white women were expected to exert influence, became a space where they enacted forms of domination that mirrored their own victimization. Enslaved black women often suffered extreme brutality at the hands of white mistresses who saw them as rivals or outlets for their frustrations. This form of racialized oppression was a direct consequence of white women's inability to challenge white male, power, structurally leading to them, displacing their suffering into a more vulnerable groups. Also, another historical manifestation is Another historical manifestation of this phenomena was the role of white women in maintaining the structure of Jim Crow segregation. Many white women played an active role in racial terror, often falsely accusing black men of crimes, which led to lynchings of other forms of violence. Take a look at the case of Emmett Till in 1955, in which white women's accusation led to his brutal murder. This highlights how white women used racial violence as a means of solidifying their status within the racial hierarchy. By aligning themselves with white male supremacy, many white women secured protections that they lacked within their own gendered oppression. This strategy illustrates how oppressed groups can sometimes reinforce broader oppression systems rather than dismantle them. And I'll say this, it is just a reflection of where they come from. And in as much as they don't like this, but at the same time, they want to validate themselves by also proving to other folks that, I also got something. And I'm gonna be doing this in front of you. There's nothing, you're going to do. So it's all more of a chain, right? And this is how they grow knowing. It's more of like they want to do whatever thing they want to do, but when they get back at home, they feel like their power is like, it's not there. So the only way to prove themselves or to validate themselves is by going out there and doing it to a black person. That's when they get to understand how these things works. Also, we are going to look at, in the labor market, white women historically occupied the ambiguous positions as they gain entry into workplaces, particularly in the late 19th century and 20th century. They were still subject to economic subjugation by white men, but often received preferential treatment over black workers. During periods of economic downturns, white women frequently displaced black labor from jobs, reinforcing economic inequality. Even in feminist movements such as the early suffrage and later women's liberation movement, white women often sidelined black women's concerns, prioritizing gender issues that benefited white women while neglecting racial oppression. This exclusion highlights how white women's pursuit of liberation often came at the expense of black people, particularly black women, right? Also, when you get to look the academic and intellectual spheres, which also illustrates how white women reflected the oppression onto black people. Early feminist theorists and writers often framed their struggles in ways that ignored or even appropriated the experiences of black women. White feminists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, despite advocating for gender equality, expressed racist views when black men received voting rights before white women. Still, their rhetoric reinforced the notion that white women, though oppressed, still deserved to be prioritized over black people, right? This pattern continued into modern feminism, where mainstream feminist discourse often centers white women's struggle while minimizing the unique challenges faced by black women due to the intersection of race and gender. When you get to learn the critical race theory, you'll get to understand how this is well documented. While we're not talking about just a black person, we're not just talking about a white person. We're looking at how are these genders, intersecting? How are these genders affecting other people? You're going to look at what is called intersectionality when you get to study the critical race theory, right? And so we are seeing this unique pattern where white women will always want to be placed in front of black people, right? And this is a reflection of the oppression that they have been going through. As a result, they'll always try to show it by always wanting validation of feeling that they are way much better than you, a black person. Also, the role of white women in upholding racial disparities extends into contemporary times. Many white women continue to benefit from systemic racism while simultaneously critiquing gender inequality. The phenomenon of white tears, where white women position themselves as victims, is racialized encounters, and such as the police on black individuals for minor grievances demonstrate how historical patterns of racial displacement persist. White women's use of their perceived fragility to wield power over black people reflects a long history of manipulating racial narratives to maintain both gendered and racialized privilege, right? And so it's important to note that white women have historically been oppressed under patriarchal systems. Their response to the oppression have often reinforced racial hierarchies rather than dismantled them, right? So we need to understand that they are a product of what they've been going through. As you know, this is your presenter, Generic Stories, and I'm hoping to see you in my next video. But until then, peace, love, and harmony. Salute.